have been a strong support for all these accountability processes, and also in the ICJ is following the Gambia's presentation. Is being, because one of the problems that we have with the ICC is that Myanmar is not part of the ICC. Doesn't recognize the ICC. So in the ICJ, it's been seen, and there were some measures, interim measures asked for to stop violence against Rohingyas and so on. Hasn't happened. But we have to say we have been raising our voices. We have been asking for justice. We have been asking for stop the violence, and we have created this investigative mechanism that will be able to have all the criminal investigation that will bring people to the perpetrators to be held accountable, and to have to face the justice, and they will bring justice to the Rohingyas. It was asked in terms of how Bangladesh has many challenges. One is climate change, the other are the Rohingyas, and probably many more. And of course, the speaker space is not as big as we could. In the case of the Rohingyas, I have to say though, that all the work done in the camps is thanks to, of course, the UN is there, but the financing is by donors, by countries. So when we are asked to that the countries should share the burden, yes, they should share the burden, but there is being shared. There's a lot of money bringing out from abroad, so these things can happen. They can bring shelter, refuge, etc. And on the other hand, if any dollars was put, if any dollars was for Cox's Bazar stamps, 15% of the dollar has to be to the host community, has to be used in the host community. So not all the money who comes is only for the camps. Some of them is to help develop the host community, and we have seen there how infrastructure has been created, how a lot of new houses, a new shop, etc. So some of those, and also the RRC is also working with government to try to increase the development of the host communities, so the host communities feel that, of course, this is not a burden for them. And in the case of climate change, well, we have been working strongly as UN, calling the international community to ensure that they fulfill, they walk the talk on the Paris Agreement, that the funds that were promised to help developing countries to be able to have the adequate response to climate change will happen. And the other thing is political, to convince the political leaders of the world that they need to take the decisions. So those countries who were the ones who emitted the most are the most responsible for climate change, because they started developing before, that they can sort of compensate in some way, so the countries who are in the developing process can continue have economic stability, but do it in a way that is more friendly to the climate situation. On the issue of more space to civil society, etc. Yes, we spoke with everyone about this, and the importance that when you want to be graduated from as a least developed country, this is not only about GDP. It's also about the capacity of the institutions to respond. It's a long list of different situations. So we mentioned that it's really important to ensure that all of these things are happening, and that's so I raised it. It was heard, and it was said that yes, understood that this is a very important issue. And on the last thing, who was more convincing? The truth is that I hear everybody. But what we do always is when we receive allegations as human rights, when we say is, look, we have received allegations, any allegations. The most healthy situation for any government, anywhere in the world, is to look into those allegations, is to see if they're true or not, is to respond to the families who can be grieving. So independently, it's not, my message is not a message, you are right, you're not right. My message is to say, independently of what happened and the circumstances and what are the kind of reasons that things happen, if they were real or not, people there, their families suffering, people need to know the truth. if there was issues that were, if there were violations of human rights, they need to be take responsibility and accountability, and people need justice as well. But mainly they need truth, and that's my message. And that my message if I go to my country, if I go to any country, you know, it's not that someone convinced me. I said, in any case, I'm a medical doctor. I'm always saying, you know, when there are wounds in a society, you need to acknowledge the problem, because the only way a wound would really heal if it's clean. Clean is a symbolic way to say if there's truth, if people know the whereabouts, etc. So that's my message everywhere I go. I went to Bosnia and Herzegovina, we discussed the same thing, to Peru, that was my last visit, and everywhere we said, if there are wounds, if there are things that are still there, producing pain, everyone has to deal with it and have to find the way to deal with it. You know? And that is listening to everyone and trying to find mechanisms and ways to deal with it, to address it. OTT, over-the-top platforms, regulations meet international human rights standards. The UN is firmly against imposition of death penalty in any and all circumstances, and I also encourage steps to reduce the scope and move towards a moratorium. During my time in Bangladesh, I also visited Cox's Bazar, where an impressive efforts have been made by the governments, the UN, and other partners in the Rohingya refugee camps. The importance of Bangladesh's humanitarian contribution and its historical significance cannot be overstated. The international community must sustain its efforts to Bangladesh in its response and press Myanmar to create conditions for return, address the root causes, and pursue accountability. These are people who fled extreme violence and systematic discrimination 5 years ago, in one of the largest movements of people in recent history. What I heard in my conversations with women, young people, religious leaders, and other Rohingya refugees in the camps was a surrounding hope that they will be able to return to their villages and homes in Myanmar, but only when the conditions are right. Unfortunately, the current situation across the border means that the conditions are not right for returns. Repatriation must always be conducted in a voluntary and dignified manner, only when safe and sustainable conditions exist in Myanmar. In the camps, I was heartened to see young girls and boys at learning centers and attended lively math and Burmese classes taught by community members. The younger children were energized and spoke of their aspirations for their future. In my meeting with older children, however, there was more frustration at the passage of the time. One boy spoke of the years lost that he will never get back, and expressed a strong desire to go back to his country, to contribute to his community, and as I said, and eventually to his home country, Myanmar. Expanding this education and livelihood opportunities for girls and boys will be the best way to prevent social problems and criminality, and to fully prepare refugees for sustainable reintegration in Myanmar society. The refugees I spoke to in Cox's Bazar, and indeed refugees and internally displaced people I've met in various parts of the world, stress that they do not want to be dependent on aid. They want to be productive, to earn a living, to contribute to society, and improve their conditions of life. I encourage the government to give space to community-led initiatives in the camps in Basan Char and Cox's Bazar, so that those with such aspirations are able to support and contribute to serving the needs of fellow refugees. Many I spoke to were fearful of the security situation, both in terms of the activity of armed groups and criminal gangs, but also the vulnerability of women and girls. The security and freedom of expression of Rohingya civil society and human rights defenders also needs to be protected. I'm very worried about increasing anti-Rohingya rhetoric in Bangladesh, stereotyping and scapegoating Rohingya as the source of crime and other problems. I'm particularly concerned that a pre-electoral context combined with economic difficulties and uncertainties will mean more hate speech against these vulnerable communities. I call on the government and all Bangladeshis to be vigilant against such harmful rhetoric, to actively counter misinformation with facts, and to foster understanding with the host communities. As Bangladesh continues to grow economically, effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions in line with Sustainable Development Goal 16 are essential for achieving the next level of development. This means inclusivity, participation, and accountability, strengthening the independence of institutions, including the National Commission of Human Rights, the Elections Commission, and the judiciary will be key. The UN country team stands by to support implementation of all SDGs. I hope my visit will further boost Bangladesh's engagement, government and non-governmental, with the UN Human Rights Office and mechanisms. Bangladesh will also undertake its fourth Universal Periodic Review in the Human Rights Council next year, which will be an important moment to take stock of progress. It is encouraging that the new Special Rapporteur on Climate Change and Human Rights will visit the country soon. And I want to call on the international community to support Bangladesh and other vulnerable states in their demand for effective climate action.
That there's a need to, as I said just before you asked, for people to heal those wounds, and that in many countries, even in the neighborhood, there has been mechanism that different kinds of mechanisms, some that make a thorough investigation. I don't have the model in my head right now because, of course, we need to. It depends on every country. It's different from one country to another. I would say usually what we recommend for any mechanism to be credible, that an independent person can be lead something. But of course, I don't have a special recipe because I don't think there can be a one-size-fits-all on this. There are different forms that have been taken in different countries. Sometimes this kind of mechanisms are judicial. Sometimes independent, as I said before, bodies. But the important thing, more than who leads it individually, and of course it wouldn't be serious on my part to propose a name or something like that, is that they have mandate, clear mandate, they have resources, they have independence, and that they have power, so they can do the job. And finally, that they're victim-centered. That is, I would say, those are the main requirements that I think are essential. Of course, we have here the Office of the Resident Coordinator has a human rights advisor and another staff, a couple of staff. We are looking forward to strengthening that group so we can deal better with all the different circumstances, including the refugee situation. And they will make the follow-up of the conclusions of what we have discussed with the government and that we have agreed with the government in many areas. So, and of course, as well, as you remember, we said that Bangladesh will have to present this fourth UPR in next year. So that's the follow-up usually done by member states, and my office always does the follow-up as in any issue. On the failure of the UN system, well, I would say, when I said we, it's not me myself who were the ones who voiced, because I was not High Commissioner at that time. What I meant to say started very soon, very early with the with special rapporteurs. I think there has been a discussion if the UN acted as it should in that case, and there was this report that the Secretary General Guterres asked Mr. Rosenthal to do, to analyze what happened in the UN at that time, if the UN and the country team reacted the way it should be, or if it shouldn't. And the report is public, and from there were lessons learned and recommendations for what to do in other situations like that. But I also believe that, and that's the lesson learned that we are also been saying to every time, because we're not part of the Security Council, we participate in the Human Rights Council. But we believe that that's why the Human Rights Council and all the work that we do in our office should fit better into the Security Council decisions. Because we could have a preventive role, because we see the early signs many times. When we are in the countries, we see what's going on. We saw the persecution of Rohingyas. So if this analysis would have taken into consideration, maybe it could have been prevented the bloodshed. Maybe a bloodshed could have been prevented. So when the times that I have been participating in the Security Council, when they have invited us, because the Security Council works in their own issues, they feel that security and human rights are not that close. We have raised this issue. We have said, look, we can be helpful in avoiding security issues from happening, or preventing security. And I think that it should be a lesson learned. I have to say that here the idea was to talk about Bangladesh, not about Xinjiang or other countries of the world. A lot of focus on Xinjiang, but this is the time to focus on Bangladesh and the Rohingyas. But I have to say, what I said when I informed that I was not going to look for a renewal for my Monday, I was asked about this, and what I said in that time, I will do it. And with a wide range of civil society actors to prevent grievances from building and erupting in social unrest. The voices of women, religious minorities, and indigenous peoples, and especially young people, need to be heard. Women's formal participation in political decision-making processes at local levels has improved in recent years. I also call on the government to take proactive measures to increase the number of women in decision-making positions at all levels. There has been much progress. More and more women have entered the labor force in some sectors, and the country has witnessed improvements in girls' education with gender parity reached in primary schools. But despite the adoption of a number of important national policy frameworks, challenges to gender equality remain. Violence against women, including sexual violence, remains high, and access to justice and accountability for the victims remains difficult. I welcome the government's recognition of HISHRAS, and I hope it will take further steps to respect, protect, and fulfill the fundamental human rights of all LGBTIQ+ persons. I stress the importance of protecting minority groups, such as Hindus and indigenous people, from violence or land encroachments. The peace accord in the Chittagong Hill Tracts 25 years ago was an important achievement. But given the continued allegation of human rights violations linked with land disputes and the need for demilitarization, I call for full implementation of the peace accord and unrestricted access for independent actors to visit the area. Bangladesh has a solid framework in its constitution, laws, and international commitments to draw from in facing human rights challenges. It is party to all the core UN human rights treaties, except for the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, which I have called on the government to ratify. The committees reviewing states' compliance with these treaties have made important recommendations, along with recommendations made through the UN Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review process and by various UN human rights independent experts. It is important to focus on implementation of those recommendations and an institutionalized system for follow-up. These recommendations are important benchmark and help strengthen linkages between human rights and sustainable development goals. Various UN human rights mechanisms, including the UN Committee Against Torture, have been raising concerns for several years about allegations of enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killing, torture, many of which have been attributed to the Rapid Action Battalion and the lack of accountability for such violations. I raised my deep concern about the serious allegations with government ministers and highlighted the need for an impartial, independent, and transparent investigation into these allegations accompanied by security sector reform. There are continued alarming allegations of both short-term and long-term enforced disappearances, and concerns about the lack of due process and judicial safeguards. Particularly given the long-standing frustration at the lack of progress in investigation and other obstacles to justice, I encourage the government to create an independent, specialized mechanism that works closely with victims, families, and civil society to investigate allegations of forced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. And my office is ready to provide advice on how such a body could be designed in line with the international standards. Inviting the UN Working Group on Enforced Disappearance to visit Bangladesh would also show a commitment to decisively address this issue. As the biggest contributor of uniformed personnel to UN peacekeeping missions, Bangladesh should ensure it has a robust system in place to ensure the careful human rights screening of security personnel. I also discussed law reforms to bring domestic legislation in line with international human rights laws. My office and the government have engaged in dialogue on review of the Digital Security Act. I acknowledge the need to regulate the online space, addressing online hate speech, disinformation, and combating cybercrime. Addressing this concern is not simple, as regulating communications always creates risk for the protection of freedom of expression and freedom of press. We have submitted our recommendations for repeal and revision of certain provisions of the Act, with a view to ensuring their compliance with international human rights law and standards and preventing arbitrary application or misuse. We look forward to the government's feedback and timeline to expedite the review.
So I think if you say, if I understood rightly the question, first, I am happy to have come to the United Commission because I think it was an important opportunity for me to visit this beautiful country that has a lot of challenges, not only in human rights. I mean, of course, we speak of economic, social, and cultural rights, so everything is human rights for human rights, but I mean climate change and also economic development, etc., social development. So I think it was, for me, it's every time that I visit a country, the possibility of meeting with different stakeholders and to discuss different issues and to listen to their perspectives. They might not agree in the perspective, but that's normal in the world. And so to listen to them, to suggest things, to propose things, to hear what they have to say about it, that for me is the importance of a visit. No? And of course some things might work well, some things might take longer, because you spoke about gender equality, for example. But gender equality, there has been a lot of progress made, but they need to do more. We need to ensure really, we need to do more on gender-based violence, etc. On the issue of extrajudicial killings. Well, I had a meeting with the National Commission of Human Rights, and they gave me the report, last year's report. And in that last year's report, there are cases named by the National Commission of Human Rights on all of these issues: extrajudicial killing, enforced disappearance, and torture. So there is not only the information that comes through civil society, the UN treaty bodies that have for a long time, the Committee on Torture, Enforced Disappearance, etc., but also even the National Commission of Human Rights has, and I read what they wrote there, they also acknowledge there are some cases, maybe not all the cases. It was only the report for 2021, and they also said torture and death in custody. So it is, so these are the kind of things that that in some way there has been acknowledged by some institutions, international institutions and national institutions as well. And I hope that the proposal recommendation that we have given and that the UPR has given and all the committees of the UN has given could be implemented. I think this will be really important. So because the other thing, what suggestions we do is, we have been suggesting that it's important to have more national dialogue. The international context is very complicated. The COVID-19 produced a lot of consequences, health, social, and economic. The war is creating more consequences that will increase people's problems. So I believe, because I am a Democrat, that when you have problems, the whole spectrum of political parties, civil society, will think on the country. We should get together, dialogue, and see, yes, we are under difficult circumstances, we have this climate change. How are we can we be able
to identify 4, 5, 6 things we all agree on and we can push together. You might think I'm naive, but I do believe in that. And I've tried to do it in my whole life as a politician, to try to get to a national dialogue, to try to get to certain agreements. You're not agreeing on everything, you don't agree on everything, but at least what can you agree on? Particularly when you're going to election time. I understand election time is about differences, but it's also about saying, we all love our country. What can we do A, B, or C that are really essential to move forward so everybody can benefit of that? And I think also the people of the countries, they feel when they see that the politicians can be together and have something in common, they feel they could start trusting politics, they can start trusting institutions, because they feel that even they have differences, they are able to get together. And also when you can agree on something, you can also agree how to disagree. How you solve with things you disagree. So I think that especially with many economic challenges that will come, I think something should be put aside, and there should be certain agreements to be able to move forward with everyone. So let me try to understand the last thing. Oh, if I think that it will be hope or not, I think I mentioned it in my statement, the initial statement. I saw hope in. Oh, wait, let's. I saw hope in children. Probably because they arrived. They were children of in 5th grade, and they arrived probably younger here, and they still have hopes. But 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old, they feel that because many of them, and that is something that is going to be solved soon, is not having access to education or skills programs. And I understand that they will start to, they will expand the education in the so-called, with the Myanmar curriculum, that is the one that now is going on. They're going to expand it, so it will, not only the ones who are now, that is first, like pre-kinder, first, second grade, 6, 7, 8, and 9, it will expand it to in between and to older ages. But it also will start a program to develop skills, so people can learn skills and can be contribute to many things inside the camps or when they go back to Myanmar and so on. So those young people, they were a little bit hopeless. But those young people being hopeless, if I would say their hope is repatriation. Their hope is to go back to Myanmar because they want to be part of their society. They want to be there. Even one teacher, he told me he was a great student and he had to flee because of the violence and so on. And he wanted to be a medical doctor. And now he's teaching the children in Burmese. But he said, look, I speak with my friends. Now they're studying medicine. They're doing, and I was even a better student than them. So he feels, what it meant to him, the sacrifice it meant to him. Because if he would have been able to continue there, he might be a doctor right now. So that's the kind. You can feel different feelings for the people. Frustration at once, but on the other hand, feeling that if they go back, they might be able to take again the life they lost, their dreams they lost, etc. So I think there's both things, hopes and not hope. But there's also fear. If we go back there, what if again we are arrested, detained, raped, victims of violence? So they feel also they want to go back, but they want to go back there where there are the basic enabling conditions for a dignified and safe to live. And we say that it also has to be voluntary. You cannot force people to go back. But those enabling conditions are important for two reasons. First of all, because it's their right. Everybody has the right to live in their home in the best dignified way, everyone, because we're all human beings. But on the other hand, because if you make them return forcefully, when the conditions are not there, you will have a new plate of refugee soup. You've had it in so many times in the history. So if those conditions don't change, this will be over and over again. So that's why we have been calling, and in this case, I can say I personally have been talking to neighboring countries to ask them to use their leverage power to ensure that in the society they create the industrial conditions, that they recognize the Rohingyas as citizens of Myanmar, not as Bengalis without any rights. So those are the things, and they need to ensure that they can come back to their homeland.
Deepen cooperation with us, furthering the promotion of human rights and the protection of human rights in Bangladesh. My visit coincided with an important day of national mourning, commemorating the assassination of the first Prime Minister of independent Bangladesh, Matiur Rahman, on the 15th of August 1975. It was a day which naturally lent itself to reflections on the history of Bangladesh, its painful past, a people's struggle for independence, and for the human rights, millions of whom had been forced to flee in 1971. In my discussion with civil society members and government officials, the sense of pride at this history of resistance and resilience of the Bangladesh people came across strongly. Bangladesh has made remarkable economic and social progress and is aiming to graduate from least developed country, LDC, status in a few years. Starting from a low baseline, Bangladesh has made strides in socio-economic development, poverty eradication, access to education and health, women's and children's mortality, access to food, water, and sanitation. Bangladesh has been a leader in international fora on key human rights issues, such as migration and climate change. It has also stepped up to provide refuge to more than 1 million Rohingya refugees who were forced to flee persecution and serious international crimes being committed against them across the border in Myanmar. Bangladesh also continues to face challenges on the human rights front, and I have been able to discuss many of these extensively with the government and civil society members. In Dhaka, I met with the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina Waseb and the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Home Affairs, Law and Education, and other state officials. I met with the National Human Rights Commission and representatives of civil society, as well as members of the diplomatic community and academics. I was able to interact with students at the Bangladesh Institute of International Strategic Studies on Climate Change and Human Rights. The delegation from my office was also able to represent me in meetings with other stakeholders, including trade unions and political parties. My discussions came against the backdrop of increased economic strains due in part to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the globally reverberating consequences of the war in Ukraine. Rising food and fuel prices mean that the cost of living is increasing, and in such circumstances, of course, the most marginalized and vulnerable are hit the hardest. The country's keen vulnerability to the adverse effect of climate change is a persistent challenge. Bangladesh is also entering an election cycle, with general elections due next year, which tends to be a time of increased polarization and tension. In such circumstances, what is key is that people from various sectors of society are heard, and they feel heard. Civil society members are important resources that governments need to tap into. Critical voices can help to identify the problems, to acknowledge them, to dive deep into the causes and discuss solutions. Acknowledging the challenges is always the first step to overcoming them. My exchange with civil society representatives was rich and insightful. This was not surprising, as Bangladesh has historically had a wealth of civil society expertise in various fields. But successive human rights reports have documented a narrowing civic space, increased surveillance, intimidation and reprisal, often leading to self-censorship.
Laws and policies over-regulating NGO and broadly restricting the freedom of expression make it difficult and sometimes risky for them to function effectively. Democratic and civic space, as well as effective checks and balances and accountability, are essential as Bangladesh aims for the next levels of development. It also contributes to decrease the risk of corruption and other hurdles to sustainable economic development and sound fiscal management. The election period will be an important time for Bangladesh to maximize civic and political space, including freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly of political activists, human rights defenders, opposition parties and journalists. It is also important to ensure that law enforcement forces have the necessary training to manage protests without resorting to the excessive use of force.
I'm not the one to speak to speak on behalf of the government. They are the ones who to say whatever they think about what we discussed, the proposals that I made them. But from my side, I acknowledge, as I already said, I stress, if I would say, the importance of acknowledging the existence of each problems, that it was better to acknowledge, to address them, to make the investigation that were needed. And I also share with them my experiences as former head of state of federal government. And my own experience in Chile, being a country who had grievances similar to the ones. And even my father died tortured in 1974, and the prime minister in 1975. So I can understand her pain as well, because we live situations that are similar in that sense. So I also share with them what we did in my country, how we deal with some issues. And I also share my experience that I always felt when I receive any allegation of any kind, that it's better to say what if it's true, because it might not be my policy, but maybe some things are happening. And if I know that are happening, I can do something about it. So that's the kind of conversation we had, to say, look, they might be all not true, but if I hear something, I always, in my case, said, what if it's true? Let's analyze it, let's investigate it and see if it's true. If it's not true, okay, you investigate it, you know it's not true, things are clear. But if it's true, how we remedy, how we take the measures. So that's the kind of conversation that we had. On the, no, I don't know. I don't know why you make this comparison, really. You're talking about, that's what I asked you about Cox's Bazar, being in Gaza. No, what we did see, what we did hear, we don't see, is a concern about security issues inside. Because as you probably know, in September was killed the leader of the Rohingyas, and this was really felt with a lot of sadness, and I'm not sure somebody has replaced that role as a leader that really plays a role. And there has been some murders, somebody has appeared, and the police is investigating who is the ones who are behind these things and why this thing happened. And I think the Rohingyas are really concerned about this. They feel insecure to go out at night. And I'm talking not to Kali, I'm talking to go to the washrooms, because some people have been kidnapped and some people have been killed. They're not many, but it's happening, and it might be related to certain groups or maybe tensions inside. But there's all histories, nothing that we can have evidence of this. Some people say that different gangs, or there can be some gangs related to drugs. But to be honest, I don't see any relation with that, any relation. But of course, security needs to be reinforced and needs to be discussed how you ensure the security of all those men, women, etc. We don't have enough information what happened with those people who were kidnapped. Is it women who have been trafficked? I don't know. And I don't want to go into inventing things that I cannot tell. But I think it's something that I have raised with the RRC and with government in terms of which are the kind of situations that they are they know about it, but that the refugees raised with me. So I complained to the authorities as well, so they can take measures. There has been I have to be clear, Bangladesh has always been part of the UN human rights system. They are part of 8 of the 9 treaty bodies. They have been member of the Human Rights Council many times, and I know that they are trying to be a member soon as well. So they have been doing a lot of work, and they have been very active in promoting a lot of very important resolutions in the council. And they have been very active, as I said in my words as well, on climate change on the international level, not only in human rights, but in all levels. But what I think is important is that we not only I'm visiting here, and we have discussed lots of issues with everyone, and we understand this is not one-time visit. That is, it means that we are opening. We are on this. After this visit, we will be strengthening even more what we have been doing in the past in the different areas that we have discussed. And as I said before, there will be more than one special rapporteur coming. If I'm not, the next rapporteur will be the climate change and human rights. This is a new rapporteur, just started in March, and they have defined a lot of mandates that many of them are really in accordance to, I think, many of the concerns that the Bangladeshi people has, and that today in the morning in the meeting with the youth students came about funding, about how to ensure that climate action does not undermines the economic stability of the countries, that they don't undermine the workforces of companies that may be importantly responsible for emission, etc. So I think that will be a very important visit. That will happen at the end of September, and if I'm not wrong, also will come the Special Rapporteur on Human Trafficking before the end of the year. So I would say we have been seeing an interest of the government to receive a lot of mandate holders of different, not only the High Commissioner, but also mandate holders on areas that are important into Bangladesh. On the issue of justice for Rohingyas, I would say that we were first of all, I have to say that the human rights mechanism was the first to raise the alarm about the scale. First of all, of then, I don't know if it was 2015 or 2014, the special envoy on Myanmar and Rohingya situation said that if nothing was done, this thing could get worse, and it could come into a possible violence and genocide. And that voice was not heard at the time for the international community, I have to say. And the Human Rights Council every year spoke about this, calling the international community, calling the Security Council to do something about it, because to prevent things from happening. Then came 2017, we know, all of us know what happened, but I have to say that we have all been warning about the persecution of Rohingyas for many years. And what did the Human Rights Council do? The Human Rights Council established, first of all, a commission of inquiry, who worked for some years, and who identified perpetrators, was a definition of perpetrators of violence, etc., etc. But in order to be able to ensure justice, that's not enough. So it was created a double investigative mechanism on Myanmar, where there is a criminal investigation, where people who are doing this are people who are experts, that have been judges in other criminal investigations in Rwanda or in other or in the Balkans. So people who have experience. So they are doing right now a criminal investigation to try to identify perpetrators, to help them accountable. But the other thing is that, of course,